Hey, welcome to the Lion Share podcast where we talk family, faith, football, finance, and fun. I'm your host, Mitch Lyons. This episode is always brought to you by Mitch Lyons Wealth, your best game plan to protect, grow, and win retirement. And don't forget to subscribe, by the way, so you can be alerted when we have some great guests coming on. And we have a great guest today. I've had a slew of NFL guys on this fall, but this guy goes way back for me to 1993 in Atlanta, my rookie year. And we'll kind of lay it out. He wasn't a coach, he wasn't a player, but he played a big role in the organization as the radio play-by-play for the 1993 Falcons. Bill Rosinski. Bill, welcome to the show.
Mitch, it's been a long time. And when you contacted me about this, I started having flashbacks to the Falcon Inn,
The
which I
best
lived for.
Western Falcon in.
Yeah, I lived there for a year,
Yeah, I know
92
you
to
did.
93. And it was 3 years. I was there for 3 years, left after 94 to go up to Charlotte, be the first voice of the Panthers. But those were 3 years. And you know this. Glanville coach. I mean, just the characters in the locker room,
Andre,
the head
Dion.
coach. I mean, it was. I don't know if I was a three-ring circus, but it was certainly a fun 3 years that I had.
Yeah, it was fun, and yeah, that's when I met you. I met you at the Best Western Falcon Inn because myself and Robbie Tobeck, we were kind of living there, because we had nowhere else to go as young and dumb rookies, wet behind the ears. They stuck us in the back then. Atlanta had their own motel up in Sewanee,
Yeah.
so we just housed there. You were housing yourself there, so we got to know you a little bit before camp even started because we were there ahead of time for the mini camps and all that. So got to know you, and yeah, doing the math, that's a good 30 years ago, which seems
Uh,
unbelievable, but 31 years ago if we're doing the math, now that I do it correctly. Uh, yeah, so yeah, a fun ride in Atlanta, and then yeah, then I guess tell us about that. I guess that was your first play-by-play gig. How did that come about that you got your foot in the door to be the play-by-play guy in Atlanta, and then we'll talk about Carolina.
yeah. Well, I had been doing. That was my when I got out of college in '75. That was my major was radio and television, and I wanted to be a play-by-play guy. I never knew what sport it would be. And you break into the business now, and I worked at a little station in Ohio, and I did high school football, basketball, baseball. We did some small college stuff, and I gradually worked my way around the country, a couple of towns in Ohio. I grew up outside Buffalo, New York, so I'm a Bills fan. Just want to let you know.
A
And
long-suffering Bills fan.
was was in Buffalo for a year, and then I went to work for UPI Radio in New York City. And I wasn't doing play by play, but I was covering all the big events, and I got to know all the people that worked for the old Mutual Radio Network, which is now Westwood One, NBC, CBS, all those people. And I wanted to get back into doing play by play. And in 1985, a job opened up at the old Mutual Radio Network, which, as I said, it became Westwood One in the late 80s, and it is still Westwood One.
Yeah.
And I was basically a weekend anchor, but they did so much play by play. I waited for my time. I said, hey, I'd like to do college football. In 87, I did my first college football game, was Penn State and BC up in Boston. And they liked my work so much that the next year I started doing NFL games. And I did NFL through 91 and worked with guys like Jack Ham, Jack Snow, among other analysts. And I always wanted to be a voice of a team. So as it's like February of 92, football season's over, and I'm working the weekend shift, and this guy walks by in our office. He says, hey, you hear the Falcons are looking for a play-by-play guy. I go, really? So I sent in a tape. I don't know if anybody knows what a tape is
Yeah.
now, but I sent in a tape and a resume. And lo and behold, I heard from them. I was one of five, let's say, finalists for the job. They flew me down to Atlanta. And I kind of had an inkling I might get the job because I was meeting with Taylor Smith, who was the president of the team, Tommy Nobis, who was still, the very first Atlanta Falcon. Tommy
Yeah.
was in the front office, and Charlie Taylor, who was their PR guy. And I'm in this meeting, and I got through the meeting, and Taylor Smith looks at me and he says, because he knew about my work with Westwood One, he said, hey, we're flattered you applied for the job. So I go, I think I got a chance for this. So I
So
did.
you had a little leverage at that point.
Yeah. So I got the job and became the voice of the Falcons. And it was, I worked for WSB as well, doing morning sports and stuff like that. But I really enjoyed it. I mean, we lived at a great golf course. After the Falcon Inn, we got into what is now the Country Club of Roswell,
Yeah.
Willow Springs development. It was great. I loved my 3 years there. I didn't want to leave. And like I said, that was team was never great, had a lot of talent. When we went through from Chris Miller to then Bobby Abear, and then
Yeah.
Jeff George showed up, and it was a wild time. But I really enjoyed those 3 years.
Yeah, it was fun, and then you leave there, and you're right about having some characters, man, between Glanville and Dion and Andre Rison and Bad
Right.
Moon, just a lot of characters. Eric Pegram, the running back. I mean, Ironhead Hayward. I mean, we had some real personalities.
Oh, and Jerry, Jerry Glanville. I mean, he was driving on that. He drove on the Bush circuit.
Yep.
And this is what gets him fired because you guys, it was like a Tuesday, and everybody, you guys are off, but the coaches are prepping for the next game. He gets in a wreck testing at Charlotte,
Oh,
and it makes the newscast.
yeah.
They see him, putting him in an ambulance. He was fine, but I'm thinking to myself, well, this doesn't bode well with your head coaches.
Well, not when you're in the midst of a 3-game skid to miss the playoffs. It was a bad recipe.
So it was. You're right. It was quite the 3 years. Very entertaining.
So along comes the expansion teams, the Panthers and the Jaguars. So how did that transpire that you made the jump from Atlanta to Carolina to take over that gig?
Well, I really didn't want to leave. I loved, the Falcons treated me like part of the family. I could actually walk in the front offices there. I could walk by Taylor Smith's office, and he'd go, "Hey, Bill, how you doing? Hey, come in here. I want to ask you a question."
Yeah.
It was all like that there, and didn't want to leave. But as I said, I was working for WSB. WSB ends up losing the rights to the Falcons because WSB they had lost the Braves when I got to town. And that's when the Braves started winning.
Well, that was a Braves town, right?
Yes, yes. So during my 3-year stint, SB's out there negotiating to try to get the Braves back. Well, then the Falcons did not want to be tied in with anything with the Braves because they had an identity crisis, as you know.
For sure.
So they went to an FM rocker, and the FM rocker had nothing for me to do aside the play-by-play. This was going to be a massive pay cut. And then a friend of mine who worked in sales at WSB had left, and he went to Charlotte and was setting up the Panther Radio Network. So long story short, he sets up an interview. I interview with the Panther organization, and I tried to talk to Taylor Smith about this. I said, I can't take a huge pay cut. And he said, I understand that. And so eventually I went to Charlotte. 10 years doing the Panthers, and I got to a Super Bowl, which was kind of cool. Although, wasn't long after I left when Dan Reeves comes in. And
no question, yeah, yeah. I just interviewed Robbie Toback last week. He was down there, and we talked about came in the same year, and yeah, we talked about that. What from '96 when we were 3-13. To 2 years later, they're in the Super Bowl on a 14-2 season. That was a big turnaround with a lot of the same players. And there's a fine line between winning and losing. And oftentimes it boils down to leadership. And it might have been Dan Reeves, bringing in a little more discipline maybe than what was there prior to that. And have had the attention of the guys. Haven't had a pretty good track record. So,
well, that happened here in Charlotte. George Seifert was 1-15. He got fired. John Fox came in, and 2 years later, we're in the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
so you're right.
It's wild. But let's talk about this because for younger folks that don't remember this, I mean, let's go back to the expansion draft because I was a guy, run and shoot offense. I'm a tight end, right? I'm hoping to kind of to get left on the expansion list, and I didn't get exposed, and I'm like, shoot, and because the first year was '95, right? Yeah,
that's correct.
And so I'm hoping to kind of get left on the expansion and hopefully get picked up by one of these expansion teams, right? But what people don't remember, and maybe some people will, but if they ever expand, which inevitably they probably will, but if they ever expand again, there will never be an expansion situation like there was in 1995. Because for people that don't know, I mean, number one, they had the advantage of starting with, a completely wide open cap. They had no players, so they had all the cap to spend. They had first picks in each round, plus they got a pick at the end of the round, each draft, right? I mean, each draft round.
Yeah. Yeah.
They basically had double the picks. They had a wide open salary cap, and there's no mistaking why those teams made the championship games their second year of existence, right?
Oh yeah.
You think back?
Definitely. I remember, like Darian Connor, who wasn't Darian with he had showed
from Atlanta to
he was on that '95 team. You're right. I think that first year they had 3 number ones. They picked Kerry Collins, Blake Brockermeyer, and Tyrone Poole in the first round.
I don't doubt it. They might have somehow traded. I mean, they definitely had plenty of draft capital, so maybe they moved up with another
Yeah,
pick. But yeah, it
yeah,
was insane, and you will never see anything like that again. And you think back to probably the previous expansion team prior to that was Tampa Bay, right? John McKay's probably rolling over in his grave when he sees how these expansion teams got treated. I remember that '76 season they went defeated, right? They never won a game, the Tampa Bay Bucks.
right.
And that's the famous line they asked John McKay what he felt about the execution of his team, and he said he was for it.
Yeah, right,
Yeah,
right.
for
Well,
the execution of my
you
team.
know, as you recall, in '95, that first year of the Panthers, your first game,
Yeah, you
Carol.
almost
I
beat
mean,
us in the first
we came.
game.
It was very, and that was really emotional for
Overtime.
me. It was
Overtime.
emotional
Morton
for me
Anderson kicked a
because
field goal in overtime.
yeah, I it was the easiest game I ever had to prep for because I still knew all you guys and I knew the Panthers, and yeah, I mean, we scored. It was right to Metzelar's the first drive of the game. The
Pete
Panthers got
Metzelars. I
scored
know
first.
Pete from way back when he was with Buffalo. I was just a college kid, but he used to come in Grand Rapids for a golf outing that he was involved with and I was involved with. And yeah, I got to meet Pete. A great guy. But
Yeah, and I'll tell you the other big difference because Bill Polian and Mike McCormick ran that organization when it first started, and remember when I told you how the Falcons treated me like family, the Panthers did too, but there was a fine line. I would never ever walk down the front hall offices and go say hi to Bill Polian or Mike McCormick. That would never happen with that organization. It was very buttoned up. And Bill had a lot of his people come in from Buffalo because he had been out of the league like maybe a year or two working for
yeah,
I think he worked for the NFL for a while. And McCormick, he was a Hall of Famer. And I remember him. I was doing a radio show that first year, and someone called in and asked me how many games I thought the Panthers could win that first season. And I saw some of the talent, and I said, we might win 5 or 6 games. And McCormick sees me later in the week, and he goes, Bill, you're crazy. We're never going to win 4 or 5 games this season. You got to stop, getting the fans all jacked up. Well,
yeah,
we won 7.
yeah. Yeah, and to go one step further, so we beat Falcons. We beat the Panthers in the first game at home in overtime. And then, which wasn't a good look for the Falcons who are, supposedly going to make a push for the playoffs, which we ultimately did.
Yep.
But it came down to the last 2 games. We had to win one of our last 2 games. And our last 2 games were on the road at Carolina in the 15th game, expansion Carolina, or you have to play the number 1 seed Niners, who were still playing for the number 1 seed. So obviously, most of Atlanta's fan base is thinking, we better beat the Panthers. You guys
Yep.
beat us in Carolina. So now we're going back. We got to win in San Francisco, and not a lot of people had hope of that happening. And Bobby Hebert ends up leading us. Jeff George gets hurt. Bobby comes in, leads us on a game-winning drive to make the playoffs. That was the famous game where, if you remember, Darryl Talley being a Buffalo fan,
Right.
Darryl was in that. He was there that year. He was very frustrated all year because he didn't agree with the defensive coaches. He literally showed up to the game with his U-Haul trailer packed, ready to leave to drive to Florida because he didn't think we were winning the game. And I remember June Jones in the pregame speech. You guys all know what's at stake, so let's get it done. Let's make the playoffs. And whoever's got the U-Haul packed out in the player lot, get out of here. And sure enough, man, Darryl Talley packed the U-Haul, which is unbelievable. And we win, and we go to Green Bay the next week in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But yeah, back to my point. That was a pretty sweet setup for those expansion teams. They both make it in '96, and in fact.
Yeah.
'96, we're playing Jacksonville in the last game of the year. They have to win the game in order to make the playoffs. And Morton Anderson misses a 19-yard field goal or something like that, slipped and missed it to the game winner as time ran out. They make the playoffs because of that, and then win a couple games and make the NFC Championship game. It was surreal.
Yeah. Well, the other thing with the Panthers in '96, because of free agency, they added Wesley Walls, Steve Berline,
Kevin Green.
Kevin Green, and Eric Davis.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about a free agent haul. I think that's one of the underrated free agent signing classes of all time because they all played. I mean, Berline backed up Collins, but he came in some key situations that
Yeah.
season to win games. And they were undefeated at home that year as the stadium, because that game you talk about losing to the Falcons, that was at Clemson.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah. Because I remember what do they have, the thing you rub as you're coming down to the
Howard's Rock, I think.
yeah, Howard's Rock.
Yeah.
I remember doing that. Yeah, so that was interesting. So yeah, so you had a good run there, 10 years, like you said. You made a couple championship games. You made the Super Bowl, which had to be quite an experience. You didn't get the win, but just maybe I'm assuming that was the first Super Bowl you called.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
that's the only
so
Super Bowl I've called.
so that had to be pretty exciting, huh?
It was a surreal week because we had to win three playoff games to get there. We beat Dallas at home, then went on the road and played the Rams, who were still really good. Kurt Warner wasn't
Yeah,
the quarterback then, but they still had Marshall Faulk and Holt and those guys, Isaac Bruce. And that was the game that went double overtime. And the Panthers scored on the first play of the second quarter. Steve Smith with the famous, it's the ex-clown play that they called, still lives in infamy here in Charlotte. And so then we go to Philly. And I'll never forget a Philadelphia, I think he was a sports writer, broadcaster, and found out I was the voice of the team. And he comes up to me before the game and he says, "Do you think you guys even have a chance today?" And I looked at him and I said, "Have you been watching these games?" I mean, they won a lot of close games. I
yeah,
mean, Cardiac Cats was kind of their nickname because every game came down to the wire. And they were doing it with Jake Delhomme. Jake Delhomme didn't even start the season as quarterback. It was Rodney Peete, and they had Chris Weinke, and Delhomme was an afterthought.
yeah,
They put him at halftime of the first game, and the rest is history. But
yeah.
we ended up winning, dominating that game. Knocked Donovan McNabb out. I think he had some rib injuries, and went on to the Super Bowl, which was, I think a very underrated, exciting Super Bowl. Came down to the Patriots driving down at the end and kicking a field goal to win it.
Yeah, it's that had to be an amazing and kind of the penultimate moment of your broadcasting career, I would say, right? I mean, a lot of
Oh,
years leading
sure.
up to that, it had to be a pretty cool feeling to be able to call the big show, right?
Yeah, I tell people, so I've been in this, it'll be 50 years next year, started in 1975. And when people ask me, what are your most memorable things that you've called? And it's the Super Bowl's always at the top of the list, regardless of what I've done. I've done college football playoff games. I've done NFL playoff games for Westwood One. But the next two, and I know we're going to talk about this at some point, I've covered a lot of golf since 2009. And the next two on the list are the Mickelson Stenson showdown at Troon in 2016. I was there for every shot of that final round. It was unbelievable. And the year before that, I covered the Open Championship at St. Andrews. So just being there,
Yeah,
and that was the year Spieth had won the first two majors.
yeah,
And I've got Spieth and Jason Day in the last group, and we finished on Monday because of the winds, and the weather was okay, but it was just too windy. So we finished on Monday. Spieth birdies 16. He makes like a 60-footer to tie for the lead. And I'm thinking to myself as I go to 17, the road hole, he's going to par this. 18's a short hole. I go, he's going to birdie 18, win his third major. Well, no, he bogeyed 17, couldn't birdie 18. And that ended with Zach Johnson winning a three-man playoff. But that's my list. It's a Super
yeah.
Bowl and then two Open Championships.
Well, that's incredible. Yeah, and I've got some golf questions for you, but before we flip the script from football, so I saw your tweet a while back, earlier this week, I think it was, talking about your first job and who your boss was in your first job. And I'm up in Lions country up here in Michigan, and obviously the whole state's on fire for the Detroit Lions. And Dan is their very exuberant radio play-by-play guy, and the fan base loves him. And my favorite things on Monday are to go back and watch the videos of him calling the radio broadcast because he is into it and he's great. And so, yeah, I guess tell us about that. I guess you're going back. That was your
Well, this,
what year
yeah,
was
this
that?
is
You would have
it was 1985.
okay.
And I had been with UPI. I started with UPI Radio in New York in 81. They moved us to DC at the end of 83. And UPI was getting in all kinds of financial trouble. And, we were even worried about even having a radio network at some point. You had to take a pay cut, all that.
Yeah,
But through my travels, I got to know all the other people, the higher ups at the radio networks. And I found out that Mutual Radio, which was based as we were living in DC at the time, down in Virginia. And the Mutual Radio Network was looking for a weekend anchor. So the job was Saturday, Sunday. It was like two 12-hour shifts, but it paid more than my full-time job at UPI Radio. Plus, I knew I wanted to get back into play-by-play. Mutual did Notre Dame. They did NFL games. They did college football games, college hoops. So I thought if I can get in the front door, I'll have a chance to get back into play-by-play. So they hired me, and I show up. Danny was my producer. Dan Miller, I first met Dan Miller. It was a Saturday, and I have sometime like in March of 85. and I walked in the studio and I got to know Danny. And that was a really interesting crew there. And Danny always wanted to get into, the play-by-play stuff. He was more behind the scenes at the time, produced a lot of stuff play-by-play stuff that I'd done. And, eventually, so I left there to go to Atlanta in 92. And Danny hung around for a while, but then he got into TV. He actually I think he got to Detroit as the Fox Sports anchor.
Right.
And then when the Lions were looking for a play-by-play guy, and this is going to be in '05. In fact, I was looking then because
Yeah.
Panthers had let me go. And Danny, I'm talking to Danny, and he goes, "Do me a favor, don't apply for this job because I want it." I said, "Okay, great." So he became the voice of the Lions, and he's still doing that. And it was great to see him this past game.
Yeah, and he's been through some tough times like all Lions fans, and I think I think it's just cool because I think he embodies every Detroit fan out there, right? It's been decades. I mean, you can say the Bills have had tough times, but the Bills have been to 4 Super Bowls at least, right?
Yeah.
We've never even had a sniff. Well, I shouldn't say we had a sniff. We came close
Oh, last
year,
year.
which was brutal. I was out at that game, and that was a great first half, a lot of fun, not the second half so much. So, but he embodies it because he's been right there with the fan base, long suffering, just when you think there's some hope, things go awry or first round bust after first round bust. And this regime really seems to have figured it out, between Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell. As go around the league calling games still and watching football, what do you see? I mean, I think they're the real deal. I think they're probably the best team in the NFC, if not football at this point, which doesn't give you anything. You still got to finish the season, obviously, and stay
Yeah.
healthy. But from afar,
I
what do you
think
see in that team?
well, first of all, any NFL team that's going to contend needs a good quarterback, and you've got one.
Yeah,
And his completion percentage this year is nuts,
it's crazy.
absolutely incredible. And then even when the game against the Titans is a perfect example. The offense took advantage of opportunities, but they didn't put up big numbers.
Yeah,
And he threw for under 100 yards in that game.
yeah.
But the other thing the Lions have offensively is two good running backs. I mean, it's nice to have one good guy, but they've got two who are
Realistically, I mean, they're both Pro Bowl running backs this year if they keep going at the pace. It's
and the O line is held up. They had some moments against the Titans where they weren't very good,
yeah,
but then you got St. Brown as a really top receiver, and the defense. I work with Merrill Hodge,
yeah.
and Merrill does a lot of. He scouts a lot. He looks at teams, and the thing that impressed him most about Detroit's defense was the depth and the fact that Hutchinson's out. Pascal was out for the game against the Titans. Who could they lost somebody before, like early in the. I can't remember his name. Was
Barnes,
yeah,
linebacker.
and he said you just look at the depth of this defense, and they can make plays. So, and the mark of a really good team is to win games you're not supposed to win, or to have one aspect of it carry the load.
Yeah.
He told a story. Excuse me. Hodge did. He said, I remember my first year in the league because it was Chuck Knowles last year, I think. And Chuck was in a meeting room and he said, I'm going to give you a question. How does a team gain 500 yards and lose by 20? And Merrill thought it was like a trick question or something. He's like trying to think to himself. And Noel looks at him. He goes, special teams. He goes, special teams. And that was a perfect example of what went on in that game against the Titans. I mean, it was incredible.
That was, if you told me that they would give up, 160 or whatever yards the receiver had, and then, Rudolph's numbers, aside from the interceptions, weren't that bad. He threw for a decent amount of yards. They ran the ball and grossly out gained us, the Lions. But yeah, I mean, turnovers are a killer in the NFL, and special teams. You can't give up 200 yards of return yards and win too many games in the NFL. But they've been fun, and you're right. There's depth there, and I think that again falls back to being really good in the draft, right? Picking up players that stick and make contributions in that fifth, sixth, seventh round, and even on free agent, rookie free agents, having guys that stick and make the team and add to that depth and develop them over time. And I think they've done a great job of that. And It's hard to argue with anything. I know the fan base right now is clamoring. They want him to go out and get Max Crosby, or they want him to get, the guy from Cleveland. And, but I trust Brad Holmes at this point. Hey, listen, they want to win the Super Bowl as much as the next guy. They don't want to mortgage the next 5 years for it. But when you do have to strike when you get the opportunity, because you're one injury away. You're a Jared Goff. He sprained his ankle last week. You're a Jared Goff major injury away from, having a pretty much a rookie in there at quarterback. So
Right.
you do have to strike when you have the opportunity and do everything you can. And I know there's some time before the trade deadline, so we'll see what happens here if they can maybe add a piece on the outside to not replace Hutchison, but maybe bring a little extra depth and get some pressure on the quarterback.
Yeah, and I think going back to the running backs, especially when you get into December and January, you might have to go on the road, playoff game at Green Bay or somewhere.
Yeah.
It's so good to have to be able to pound the rock and get first downs, and that's a big asset for Detroit.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's great. I appreciate your perspective there. And now let's get to the fun stuff. So, how does a guy go from calling NFL and college football games to all of a sudden now you're getting in the off seasons, you're getting this opportunity to walk the golf course and watch some of the best, or not some of the best players in the world on a weekly basis. How'd that come about?
All right. So Panthers for 10 years. Then I went back to Westwood One. Westwood One for 3 years. So that takes, and I worked with Dan Reeves, oddly enough. Dan and I worked together for 3 years, doing, games of the week for Westwood One. And then in 2009, I left Westwood because a buddy of mine was running ESPN Radio. He was in charge of the hiring for play-by-play, contacted me about becoming the voice of college football for ESPN Radio. So it was kind of a no-brainer, and there were other opportunities there. So in 2009, I leave Westwood to go to ESPN Radio. But then also in 2009, my agent called me up and he said, hey, and I knew about PGA Tour Radio. I'm a golf fan. I like to play golf. I like to watch golf. I go to golf tournaments. And I knew PGA Tour Radio existed because you could rent the little headsets at the golf course and listen to it. And it was on Sirius XM. I didn't listen all that much, but I knew they did it. And my agent said, hey, Bill, they're looking for a play-by-play guy on PGA Tour Radio. I go, okay. They want to hear what you sound like. Okay, so Mitch, I grew up. I did high school football. I did basketball, all that stuff. I did softball games. I did a couple of soccer games on radio. Who does golf? What do you go out to the club on Saturday and take your tape recorder out there and call
follow
golf
your buddies around just to get some practice in?
Right. So I thought, I'm going, well, how am I supposed to do this? So I decided, you know what? I live most of the time in Charlotte, and I had been to the what was then the Wachovia, became Wells Fargo Championship at Quail Hollow. Now it's got a new name, Truist. And I had been there and watched Anthony Kim, a name from the past, who's now with Liv. I kind of went back and researched his final 3 holes. I took a tape recorder and I went out on my balcony just to get kind of like outside noise so you wouldn't sound like you're in a studio. And I basically did play-by-play how I thought it should sound. Here's Anthony Kim, 15 feet for birdie here. 15
Hold on, I did get back in the chair, recline it so I can take a nap as you describe the golf like I do every other Sunday afternoon.
So, I did the last 3 holes, tee shot, layups, putts, he wins, blah, blah, blah. So I listened to it and I'm thinking, there's something missing. So I had done a radio show in Charlotte and I called my producer up and I said, hey, can you put some like ambient sound on it? Like people clapping, ball wax, birds chirping. He did it.
That's awesome.
And I sent this to the tour and I got the job. And the guy calls me up and he said, I didn't know you were out there at the Wells Fargo last year. And I'm like, well, I wasn't, but I didn't tell him that. So that's how I got the job.
That's funny.
And it has led to, and it was funny because I mentioned ESPN Radio. So my second year at ESPN Radio, my boss calls me and said, hey, we just got the rights to the U.S. Open golf tournament. I'm going, great, because I can call golf. And then a year later, we got the Open Championship. So that was 5 years of doing each for ESPN Radio. And I'm still doing it now. It's I was at the Black Desert Championship a couple of weeks ago in Utah, calling shots there. I'll be at RSM down in St. Simon's in a couple of weeks, and it's great. My wife travels with me. She drives it. I have a golf cart that helps me get around. We have to jump from the 9th to the 17th hole or something like that, and it's been great.
Well, as a
I
guy that loves golf, it's got to be pretty cool, right? I mean, seeing these top players in the world, just rubbing elbows with them, watching them up close. But what's maybe a thing or two that the average fan maybe wouldn't be cognizant of in terms of, just I don't know. I mean, the being on the course, the what they're going through, the crowds, the whole bit.
I think you pretty much see everything because of television that I see. I get to interact. The cat. The cool part about it is maybe the players don't exactly know what your name is, but they know what you do.
They know you, they've
And
seen you.
and and right, and the caddies are like that too. The caddies will wink at you, say hello. They might say you can go up and ask them, hey, what did he hit back there? What was the problem with the line? And they'll talk with you. I think that's the big thing. And I've gotten to know. I mean, I've interviewed Tiger and Rory and Jason Day and DeChambeau and DJ, and they're all kind of like different personalities. That's really the fun part of the job because not and they know you've been out there calling their shots. So when you're asking them questions, they know it comes from the experience of you were there.
Yeah.
So you're asking a question, and they appreciate that. So um, I'm trying to think if there's any weird stuff. So, some players can be some nasty with fans that you don't see,
Yeah.
but you really don't talk about it.
Well, some players have a reputation, right, of maybe being a little more surly than others. Who are somebody that you're not? I won't make you name names on that end. I think a lot of people kind of see that and pick up on that. But the tour's good guys, the guys that are always
Oh,
consistently just great guys. Who
I,
a few of those
I will tell you.
fans aren't aware of?
Well, Rory McIlroy is, he became the spokesman for the tour during all this live stuff.
Yeah.
And I have never seen him. There's been times, well, at the U.S. Open this past year, he
Yeah.
left the golf course because, and I don't
He
blame
should
him.
have been. He should have been despondent, right? I mean, that was a tough beat.
Right. But very generous with his time. Uh, in fact, most of these guys are. Some
Yeah.
aren't the greatest of interviews,
Yeah.
but I've gotten to know. Here's the thing that I got to know Scotty Scheffler's family because they walk with him every golf tournament. His
Okay.
mom and dad, sometimes his sister, the rest of the family, they're just out training. So I've gotten to know Scotty's dad's name is Scott, and my wife and I have gotten to know the family. So that's another cool part about this that maybe people don't know. But we meet, and there's certain wives who will come up and talk with you.
And they
They'll
probably have a
listen.
little more time to chat with you than the players.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so Scott Scheffler and his family are just super nice people. But most of the guys on the tour are good. They may not be the greatest interview in the world, but they'll give you their time.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to reach in there and try to get out a good quote. But for the most part, they know the drill.
Makes your job a little easier. And certainly the NFL has and has had some guys that maybe aren't that, Bill Belichick, for example. It's going to be all you can do to get a good quote out of that guy, right? Now he's Chatty Cathy. He's on
Oh,
every show.
sure.
I mean, take the coaching
Yeah,
reins away, and now he's like, big TV personality now, which is kind of funny.
it is. It's
A year ago,
very
you couldn't get two
ironic.
words out of him. Now he's got now he's got. I'm sure Jared Mayo just appreciates all of Bill Belichick's opinions he's throwing out there about the Patriots now.
Yeah, and when I was talking to Dan Miller, in fact, I said you went 0 for 1 year, right? And he goes, "Yeah, we were 0-16." And I said, "Well, we were 1-15 with Seifert, but 2 years later we were in the Super Bowl." So blah blah blah. Anyway, I asked him. I said, "What was Matt Patricia like?" And he said, with me, he was great. He said, but he'd get in the media room and he turns into Belichick.
Yeah.
So there, so you get these, and that's the other thing. I've gotten to know, George Seifert. A very kind of a brainy guy. He was kind of aloof. But then there were times where George Seifert, I'm walking off the practice field one day, and he heard me on the radio talking that I was a big I Love Lucy fan. And he wanted to, we start talking, and we're walking back from the practice field talking about I Love Lucy. And I'm looking at Seifert going, man, I didn't think I'd get that out of you. But this is some of the stuff you get that people don't know about. And hasn't happened that much on the golf course. But they are, you do interviews. You mentioned Belichick, and John Fox was kind of like that. Foxy would give certain people in the media. Here's a perfect story about Fox. His first year with the team, Chris Wenke was our quarterback. They had signed Rodney Peete. Chris looked terrible in the preseason games. And Fox tells me one day as we're leaving practice, he goes, if that guy thinks he's got the number one job done, he's got another thing coming. All right. So he says this to me. So we're playing our last preseason game in Cleveland. I'm doing TV. I'm doing preseason TV. Wenke throws 2 picks. One was god awful at the end of the half. And as they're showing the replay on television, I said, did this interception initiate a changing of the guard for the Panthers at quarterback? And my producer's in my ear going, what the hell are you talking about? And even one of the sports writers the next day heard my comment and says, blah, 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 blah. People are reaching at straws here. Well, the next day they announce Rodney Peetson at quarterback. So that's the stuff you get.
Yeah.
It's necessarily, you're not going to say that before things happen, but afterwards.
Pays to put the work in and have it in your back pocket, right? Well, let me ask you this, Bill, because I mean, you've had a long career in broadcasting. You've had to work your way through the ranks. What advice would you give a young person today that wants to get in, to broadcasting, but really true of any job, dream job they want? I mean, because it's just not always easy, right? I mean,
No.
especially early on when you're, working at those high school games in Ohio, you probably weren't rubbing 2 nickels together. So, what kept you going, and what advice would you give young people today that have the same dream?
Well, first of all, my first job in radio, $1.95 an hour. And that was minimum wage back in 1975. First of all, and I think this hasn't changed. Now, a lot of it's over my head these days with the internet and the way people put together their auditions, because you can just put your own website up and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that hasn't changed in the nearly 50 years I've been doing this is you got to go out and meet people. You got to go out, you can't be texting people.
Yeah.
You can email them, great, but you've got to get out. I will tell you, the first job I got in the radio, the second job I got in the radio, the third job I got in the radio. So 2 in Ohio, 1 in Buffalo, all because I had met or knew somebody who then knew someone at the organization I was trying to join. And they put in a good word for me. UPI, I lucked out and answered an ad in Broadcasting Magazine. The job that I got at Mutual is because I had met these people traveling around the country, covering big sporting events. Again, not doing play-by-play, but doing interviews, reports, all that stuff, the Olympics, all that. So I got to know these people, and that got me in the door at Mutual. And then other jobs like, and Carolina. I didn't know anybody in Atlanta, got that job. But then the Carolina job was set up because the sales guy kept talking to these people about how good I was, and he got me in the front door. So I don't think I think sometimes because we're so used to, doing things like this via video, or like I said, texting, emailing, face to face, and they get to know you. They get to know what your personality is like, what you're like in a social setting, etc.
Some things never go out of style, right? I always tell my kids and my team, I always say, hey, don't forget the power of a handwritten note.
Yes,
and it's
exactly.
much to your example of, hey, get out and meet people, actually shake their hands, look them in the eye, and ask them what you can do for them versus, hey, what can you do for me type thing.
I still do that now. Brandon Bean is the GM of the Bills. He was here in Carolina for a long time. I wrote him a note when he got the job in Buffalo, and he responded in kind. Tom Telesco, who was it's funny, if you look at the 95 Panther yearbook, there's pictures of Tom Telesco, a couple of the Polian kids, Greg Roman. These were all like guys who were, video guy, getting tape, getting coffee.
Yeah.
Telesco is now on his second GM job.
Yeah.
He's with the Raiders. He was with the Chargers for a long time. I wrote him a note. Hey, congratulations on the job. And I was in Vegas for a game, and he made his way into the booth just to look me up and say hello and said, hey, thanks for the note. It doesn't hurt. The handwritten thank you.
People don't forget it either, right? Yeah, they don't forget it.
Right.
And when that next job is coming, it's good to have people remember you. So that's great advice, Phil. And hey, before I let you go, I've been asking everybody this that's crossed paths with this guy, and this is the guy that you crossed paths with, and I'm trying to help his daughter Jennifer, who is making a push because he won't push for himself, and you'll know why when I tell you who. But I mean, Clay Matthews is a guy that I think should be in the NFL Hall of Fame. I know you called Falcons games a couple of years there with Clay there coming off his long tenure at Cleveland, but. Give me your opinion on that. I mean, this guy is a guy that played 19 years at outside backer, a really demanding physical position. The fact that he played that many years at that position anyway, but then also at a ridiculously high level,
Yep.
right up till the age of 40. I mean, he had 6.5 sacks as as a 40-year-old. Pretty amazing career. I'll ask you. I've asked everybody. Do you think that guy deserves to be in the Hall of Fame?
Oh, definitely, definitely. You talk about the career, the numbers, the Pro Bowls, all that stuff, the leadership capabilities that he had off the field. He wore 57 in Atlanta because the guy I was doing games with, Jeff
Yeah.
Van Note, let him wear that number.
Yeah.
And there's another guy I think should be in the Hall of Fame. He went to as many Pro Bowls, or maybe more than Dan Deerdorf. And
Yeah.
here's the thing. Here's what I'm telling you, Mitch. I worked with James Lofton for a few years. Lofton told me the reason he got back into coaching was because he wanted to get in the Hall of Fame. He wanted his name out there. So people, even if they didn't know how good he was as a player, all of a sudden oh, you're coaching now. Let me look back and blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
Deerdorf, he did Monday Night Football. That all of a sudden gets him on the radar,
Yeah.
and he's in the Hall of Fame. You compare Noter's numbers and his, but Jeff played on bad
Bad
teams.
teams. Yeah. I mean, it's Tommy Novus, same deal. Played on bad teams and
Yeah.
yeah, it hurts you for sure. But
Oh,
Clay wasn't necessarily on bad teams. I mean, they had some good teams in Cleveland. He
yeah.
never got to the Super Bowl though, right? He always got knocked
Right.
off by the Browns there or the Broncos with Elway. But yeah, he's a guy that doesn't toot his own horn. I've tried to get him on this podcast. He's too humble to like come on and talk about himself. So I might have to get his daughter to come on
Yeah.
for
No,
him.
he
But
should.
he's the guy that should be in Canton. He's made that the cut. I think they're down to 30 now for the old
All right.
whatever they call the old timer selection now. But he's a guy that I'd love to see him in. And thanks for your input on that. So,
Yeah,
but
no, definitely. I think, and the problem with this is it's a bunch of writers and broadcasters sit in a room and huddle up during Super Bowl week and pick the guys who should be in. And I would be honest with you, saying some of them, probably don't know what they're talking about
yeah,
when it
I mean,
comes to evaluating talent.
I think that's a fair assessment. I don't think too many of them are there in the film rooms watching every play, of a guy's season or a career. So, yeah. Well, listen, Bill, I really appreciate you coming on. You've lent a perspective, on the other side of the mic. I've talked to people that were down on the field, but it's fun hearing it from the voice of teams. I grew up with great broadcasters. Ernie Harwell, I mean, he was a legend for the Detroit Tigers, and he's part of who I am, man. I used to set the alarm when they were on the West Coast. I'd go to bed early, set my alarm for 11 o'clock so I could get up and listen to the West Coast games for a couple hours. So he was a guy that, impacted me greatly growing up. George Blaha for the Pistons and MSU. He's
Right.
been around a long time. I'd love to get George on too. But I appreciate your perspective, my man. It's great to see you after all these years. And hopefully I'll see you out on a golf course sometime soon.
Yes, Mitch, my pleasure. Great seeing you and continued success in what you're doing.
Thanks a lot, Bill. Take care and God bless.